The wrench slipped from Nora Thibodeau's hand and clattered across the concrete floor of Thibodeau's auto, and for a second the whole garage went quiet. Not because of the noise, because of the man standing in the doorway. Deputy Commissioner Gerald Fitch didn't belong in a place like this. He was a pressed collar, gold cufflink kind of man, the kind who made other people pump his gas. He filled the doorway of the small garage on Cartier Street the way a storm fills a valley. Not loud, not yet, but with the particular weight of something that has decided it's going to ruin your afternoon. Nora wiped her hands on her shop rag and straightened up. She was 24 years old, 5'4", and had grease under her fingernails that no amount of scrubbing ever got out. She'd been running Thibodeau's auto since her father's stroke 2 winters ago, kept the lights on through 3 brutal Thunder Bay winters on contracts. She'd won fair and underbid everyone else on. And she did not appreciate the way Gerald Fitch was looking around her garage, the way a man looks at something he's already decided he's going to take. "Mrs. Thibodeau," he said. "Not a question." "Deputy Commissioner." She didn't offer her hand. "You hear about the Durango?" He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I'm here about the tender." She'd known this was coming. The city contract, fleet maintenance for the Thunder Bay Municipal Services Department, 43 vehicles, 2-year agreement, had gone to Thibodeau's auto 3 weeks ago. Lowest bid, best references, cleanest record. She'd stayed up 3 nights running the numbers, cutting her margin to the bone, because that contract meant she could keep 2 full-time mechanics, and maybe, stop borrowing against the building her father had left her. Fitch walked slowly past the '09 F-150 she had up on the hoist, running one manicured finger along the frame like he was checking for dust in a hotel room. "There's been a review," he said, "internal. Some concerns raised about the bidding process." "What concerns?" "Administrative irregularities." He waved his hand. "Vague." "Practiced. These things happen. The contract will need to be retendered." Nora looked at him. She'd grown up in this town. She knew what administrative irregularities meant when they came out of Gerald Fitch's mouth. His brother-in-law owned Northgate Fleet Solutions. Northgate had bid on the same contract and lost by 11%. "That contract was awarded by the procurement committee," Nora said. "Transparent process. 3 independent reviewers. And now there's a 4th. He stopped walking and looked at her directly for the first time. "Miss Thibodeau, you're a young woman running a small shop. I understand the appeal of a contract like this, but sometimes these things don't work out, and the healthy response is to accept that gracefully and move on." He said it the way you'd explain something to a child, slowly, with patience, like he was doing her a favor by being gentle about it. "I'm going to need that decision in writing," Nora said, with the specific irregularities identified, dated and signed. The smile thinned. "That's your right. I know it is." He left. She listened to his town car pull out of the lot and sat down on an overturned bucket and stared at the oil-stained floor for a long time. Then she picked up the wrench and went back to work, because the F-150 wasn't going to fix itself and the Beaumont family needed it back by Thursday. She didn't cry. She didn't have time. What Nora didn't know, couldn't have known, was that a man named Gravel had been parked across Cartier Street for the last 20 minutes in a dented black pickup, eating a sandwich and watching Gerald Fitch's town car sit in front of the garage, with the particular stillness of a man who has learned that patience is a tool just like any other. His real name was Thomas Willett. Most people in certain circles knew him as Gravel, a road name earned over 30 years on 2 wheels, first as a prospect in Sault Ste. Marie, then as a full patch, then as something considerably more significant. He was 61 years old, built like a man who had spent decades doing physical work and never stopped, with gray in his beard, and a pair of eyes the color of a lake in November. He wore a black jacket with nothing on the back today, which was the equivalent of a judge leaving his robes at home. Still the same man, just not announcing it. He'd known Nora's father, Gerald Thibodeau, for 22 years. They'd met at the fall poker run outside Dryden. 2 men with engines they loved and a mutual distrust of anyone who wore a tie. Gilles had rebuilt a vintage Ironhead Sportster for him once, spent 8 months on it, refused to take a dime more than parts and labor despite Gravel's protests. "You paid what it was worth," Gilles had said. "A man charges what a thing is worth." When Gilles had his stroke, Gravel had sent a card and then shown up personally, which was more than most people did. He'd watched from a careful distance as Nora took over the garage, watched her fight for every contract and every customer, watched her refuse the easier route of selling the building to the developer who'd been sniffing around Cartier Street for 2 years. He'd been in Thunder Bay for other business this week. He had not been planning to stop by the garage, but he'd seen Gerald Fitch's car, and he knew that car, and he knew the man who drove it, and he'd pulled over without quite deciding to. Now he watched Fitch drive away, and he sat with his sandwich for another minute, and then he crumpled up the wax paper and started the truck. Nora was elbow-deep in a transmission when she heard boots on the concrete. She assumed it was her apprentice, Tyler, back from his lunch run. "Grab me the half-inch socket set," she said without looking up. "Sure," said a voice that was not Tyler's. She pulled her head out and looked. The man standing there was large in the unhurried way of someone who has nothing to prove. He was holding her socket set, which he'd apparently found without difficulty. Thomas Hewlett, he said. I knew your dad. She took the socket set. I know who you are, she said. He talked about you. Good things, I hope. He said you were the only man he ever met who could tell a Harley's year by the sound of the primary chain. She went back to work. He also said you were stubborn as a fence post. Both accurate. He leaned against the workbench. That was Gerald Fitch. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer it. I know what he wants, Gravel said. His brother-in-law's been trying to get that fleet contract for 3 years. Lost it fair twice. This is the third time. Nora kept working. Her jaw was tight. You going to fight it? I'm going to request a written decision with the specific irregularities, she said. Then I'm going to take it to a lawyer and find out what my options are. That'll take 6 months minimum. And Fitch has a long memory. I know that. You need someone who can move faster. She stopped working then and looked at him directly. What does that mean exactly? He met her eyes. He had the look of a man who chose his words the way a carpenter chooses lumber. Not the prettiest, not the cheapest, just the one that will hold. It means I know things about Gerald Fitch that he would prefer remain private, Gravel said. And I know people who know more. And sometimes when a man like that understands that the information exists, and that it's being held by people who are not afraid of him, he makes different calculations. I'm not interested in anything illegal. Neither am I. Not anymore. He said it without drama, without explanation, which somehow made it more credible than if he'd given a speech. What I'm talking about is leverage. Legal, documented, properly sourced. The kind that, if Fitch wants to pursue this, makes the cost to him considerably higher than the benefit. She thought about it. She thought about her father's hands, how they'd looked when she was small. Always stained the same way hers were now, always sure. She thought about 2 Thunder Bay winters and borrowed money and the mechanics who showed up every morning because they trusted her to keep the lights on. What do you need from me? She said. Nothing yet, Gravel said. Just keep doing what you're doing and call me if anything changes. He left her a card. Plain white, just a number. She set it on the workbench and looked at it for a moment, and then went back to the transmission. That night, for the first time in 3 weeks, she slept through until morning. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Official city letterhead, Deputy Commissioner's office, 3 paragraphs of bureaucratic language that added up to one thing. The contract had been suspended pending review, and Thibodeau's auto was to cease fleet maintenance work immediately. She called the lawyer she'd spoken to before. He confirmed what she already knew. This could take months, possibly longer. He advised her to document everything. He did not sound optimistic. She did not call Gravel, not yet. What she did instead was pull every document from the original tender. Her bid, the committee's notes, the scoring sheets, the disclosure forms, and she went through them line by line at her kitchen table on Tuesday night with a cup of cold coffee. She was looking for whatever they were claiming was irregular, because if she could find it first, she could answer it. She found nothing. The process had been clean. She'd been meticulous, almost obsessively so, because she'd known going in that a young woman from a small independent shop bidding against an established company with the right connections was going to need to be beyond reproach. What she found instead, in the municipal procurement records she pulled from the city's public document portal, was something she hadn't been looking for. Northgate Fleet Solutions had been awarded an emergency single-source contract 6 months ago. Street maintenance vehicles, no competitive bidding. Value of $240,000. The authorizing signature on the single-source justification was Gerald Fitch's. The justification cited specialized equipment requirements that, when Nora cross-referenced the vehicle specs, didn't match anything Northgate specifically offered over any other fleet maintenance provider. It was not proof of fraud, but it was a threat. She sat at her kitchen table until 2 in the morning, pulling on it. She called Gravel on Wednesday. He listened without interrupting, which she appreciated. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You found that yourself, he said. It was not a question. Public documents, she said. Anyone could have, but no one did. Another pause. This is good, Nora. This is very good. Don't share it with anyone yet. Not the lawyer, not anyone. Sit on it for 72 hours. Why 72 hours? Because I need to make a phone call and I need to know what I'm walking into before I walk in. She didn't ask who he was calling. She thought she understood roughly, and she also understood that the less she knew about the specifics, the cleaner her position remained. Gravel made his call that afternoon. The person on the other end was a woman named Adele, who had worked in the city's financial services division for 19 years before retiring, and who had her own reasons for disliking Gerald Fitch that had nothing to do with fleet maintenance contracts. Adele had been waiting, it turned out, for exactly this kind of phone call. The next 10 days moved the way the days before a storm move. Surface calm, everything underneath building pressure. Nora kept the garage running. She took private work, stayed busy, said nothing publicly. Fitch's office called once to ask if she'd received the suspension notice and to confirm she understood its terms. She confirmed she understood its terms. She did not mention the procurement records. She did not mention Gravel. Gravel, meanwhile, was having conversations, some in person, some by phone. He'd driven down to Sault Ste. Marie and back in a day to meet with a man who had formerly worked in the provincial ombudsman's office. He'd met with Adele twice at a coffee shop on Memorial Avenue, both times early morning, both times short. What assembled itself over those 10 days was not dramatic. It was quiet and methodical, and considerably more damaging than anything dramatic would have been. There was the single source contract, which Adele confirmed had been internally flagged by 2 procurement officers at the time, and then unflagged after a meeting with Fitch's office that no one had any record of. There was a city council meeting 18 months ago at which Fitch had declared no conflict of interest on a vote that directly benefited a company his brother-in-law had a silent stake in. A stake that, Gravel's contact confirmed, had been registered in a numbered company through a law firm in Sudbury. There was a pattern of contract awards over 7 years that, when laid out in sequence, described something that looked a great deal less like coincidence than it did like a system. None of it was Gravel's to publish or report. That wasn't his role, and he knew it. His role was to ensure that the right people, in the right offices, with the right authority, became aware of what existed, and then to ensure that Gerald Fitch became aware that those people were aware. He'd learned a long time ago that the most effective thing you could do was not to threaten someone, but to make it clear that the information already existed and had already been shared. Threats could be countered. Information, once distributed, could not be put back. Fitch called Northgate Fleet Solutions on a Thursday morning. His brother-in-law, a man named Perriot, answered on the second ring. The conversation was short and did not go the way Perriot expected. The Thibodeau contract, Fitch said. The review is being closed. No irregularities found. Perriot started to object. Fitch cut him off. There are other matters requiring my attention, Fitch said. The Thibodeau situation is finished. He hung up and sat at his desk for a long moment looking out his window at the lakefront. He was not a stupid man. He understood what the call from the provincial ombudsman's preliminary review office, which had arrived in his inbox that morning, meant. He understood that someone had been very thorough, and that the information had moved through channels he could not easily reach into. He did not know who had assembled it. He had suspicions. He would not act on them. Some calculations, he understood now, he had gotten wrong. Nora got the call from the city's procurement office on a Friday afternoon 40 minutes before closing time. The contract suspension had been lifted, effective immediately, pending no further administrative action. The reviewer had found no irregularities in the original tender process. She was free to resume fleet maintenance work under the original terms of the agreement. The woman on the phone sounded almost apologetic. Almost. Nora said thank you and ended the call and sat in the quiet of the garage. After Tyler had gone home, just her and the hoist and the oil smell, and the late October light coming through the side window. She thought about calling Gravel to say thank you. She thought about it for a while. She called her mother instead, because her mother had kept Gerald Thibodeau's garage books for 15 years and had watched her daughter take on that weight without complaint. And some thank yous are owed closer to home than you sometimes remember to pay them. She'd call Gravel in the morning. She called him early before she opened the garage. He picked up on the third ring, already sounding awake. Contract's back, she said. I heard, he said. I don't know exactly what you did. Better that way. Was it legal? Every bit of it, and then because she'd earned the full answer. There are things in motion now that I had no part in starting and won't have any part in finishing. What I did was introduce information to the people whose job it is to act on it. That's all. She thought about that. Fitch? He's a man who made a calculation and found out the numbers didn't work. Gravel's voice was even matter-of-fact, the way her father's had been when he explained something mechanical. Not satisfaction exactly, just accuracy. Men like that don't change, but they do get careful. Is he going to come back at me? No, Gravel said. He said it without hesitation, which was the only way it was worth saying. How do you know? Because the alternative cost him more than he's willing to pay, and because enough people now know where to look. A pause. You keep running your shop clean, Nora. Do the work, don't cut corners. The contract's yours because you earned it, and that's the ground you stand on. That's the ground no one can take. She stood outside the garage in the cold, the Thunder Bay sky, that pale gray-white of early November, her breath visible in the air. The street was quiet, Cartier Street at 7:15 in the morning before the town had fully started. Why did you do this? She asked. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Your father fixed things, Gravel finally said. Machines, mostly. But he was also the kind of man who fixed things because they ought to work right, not because there was something in it for him. That's a rare thing. Another pause. I don't do charity, but I do pay debts. She didn't say anything. She wasn't sure there was anything to say. Open your garage, Gravel said. You've got work to do. He hung up. She pocketed the phone, unlocked the side door of Thibodeau's auto, and switched on the lights. The hoist was empty. The F-150 she'd been working on last week had gone back to the Beaumont family on Thursday, service clean, running right. A 14 Silverado was coming in at 9. A fleet vehicle city contract was booked for the afternoon. She pulled on her work gloves. Outside, the first trucks of the morning were moving on Cartier Street, heading out toward the port. toward the highway, toward wherever the day was taking them. The lake was out there somewhere beyond the buildings, massive and cold and indifferent to the small dramas that played out on its shore, the way it had always been and would continue to be. Inside the garage, a wrench in her hand, Nora Thibodeau went back to work. Some fights end in courtrooms. Some end in quiet phone calls between people who understand how the world actually moves. And some simply end on an ordinary Friday morning, with a contract reinstated and a garage that smells like oil and cold concrete, and the particular satisfaction of a thing that works the way it's supposed to. Her father would have called it a fair result. She thought he was right.